Welcome to Just Liberty. I have as my guest today Ronnie Chrisman, who is a professor who has been around pretty much the history of the School of Law. I think you were teaching the business school maybe even before the School of Law was around. And as you might guess, he's taught a lot of business law type courses. God bless him. He's one of those guys who actually likes tax stuff. And while I cannot relate to that, and maybe most people cannot relate to that, he's actually someone who thrives on unpacking the complexities of that, as well as other business law things. He's well loved in the School of Law. He's known for being very caring and approachable, but also being very thoroughgoing in trying to bring to bear the Christian worldview in all that he does. And actually, before talking about anything kind of legal or professional or things like that, want to actually go to more of a personal thing, if that's all right.
Sure.
You have a large family?
I do.
How large are we talking here?
So, well, the Lord has blessed me with 9 children. They range in age from 7 to my oldest is just turning 24. So
that's quite a range.
Yep. Yeah, no twins and no adoptions, so they're kind of spread out there.
Yes. And you were married to the love of your life. And I remember before I even came here, you had shared with the School of Law in one of our convocations about the experience of losing her.
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
Yeah, so it's almost hard even now to describe what that's like. It's certainly something we had never planned on. Heather and I had looked forward to growing old together, seeing grandkids and great-grandkids if the Lord would give us them and that long. So our expectation was that we would have years and years together. But a lot of times the things that we've planned or we've thought how they're going to be or what our hopes are, the Lord has a different story in mind. And that was the case for us, certainly. So we came here to Liberty in 2005. We moved to Lynchburg for Liberty. I initially taught at the School of Business and then moved to the law school, like you indicated. And in 2018, June of 2018, Heather unexpectedly passed away from complications from Rocky Mountain spotted fever. She had Rocky Mountain spotted fever for a number of months, undiagnosed, because she actually didn't have a fever or spots. So it didn't show up the way that maybe you would think. So we weren't looking down those lines. We still had hope that she would recover from that, but that's not the path that the Lord gave us and the story that the Lord gave us. So that's obviously been, for the children and I, that's been the biggest issue in our lives, certainly for these past 4 going on 5 years now. And we'll continue to be as we go forward. It's not something that it changes. Time goes by and it changes, but it's not something really that goes away. And there's some things I think that happen to us in this life that maybe leave marks on us that it'll be all the way to glory, for those marks to be healed. But the Lord's been good to us, and He's seen us through that. And in fact, I was an atheist early in life. When I met Heather, I was an atheist, and it's really hard for me now to understand how somebody gets through hardship and suffering without the Lord. It was really my trust in God and His goodness and the good story that He's telling through all of our lives that would be the place, a major place of comfort through what obviously has been the biggest trial and challenge of my life.
Yeah, I remember when I listened to a recording of what you shared before, I was struck by a line that you said where you said something like, the pain that you felt with the loss of your wife was so great that it was almost like, by comparison, you did not even know what suffering was
Yeah.
until you lost her.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. And even when I say that, I'm always reminded, there's people out there who may be listening to this. There's people right now who are going through suffering that's beyond what I could imagine, even with what I've been through. But it is true that I'd suffered things, I'd faced hardships, and gone through things, but those things so paled in comparison that I really was left thinking I've never suffered. I don't even know what suffering is until I'd gone through losing Heather and the aftermath of that. It's still now some things that happen. I think used to would have seemed a lot harder for me maybe than they do now, because you can kind of think, well, I've been through what real suffering is, and that's not real suffering. I'm also reminded though, I've got a lot of children, so a lot of things I talk about relate to children and little kids. But when you've got maybe young children and they're having a dispute among themselves, and they're upset and crying, and there's the tears, and we can look at that sometimes. We want to look at that and say, this is no big deal. Who gets to play with that toy right now is really no big deal. This won't matter in 5 years. You know what I mean? That type of thing. Yes. So their suffering seems so insignificant. But I can remember actually Heather saying what they're going through right now, though, to them, that's the biggest thing in the world. And I think it's that way with us. When I was going through other things I'd suffered in life, it was big. I was, it was maybe that was the biggest challenge I'd ever faced. And then later you experience other suffering, and it makes that seem like that it's like fighting over who's got the toy, who's going to get the
Yes.
toy. But it's comforting, I think, then when I consider that God probably looks at me that way sometimes, maybe
Yes,
when I'm
yes.
all upset over something
Yes.
and it seems so big.
Yes.
But to the God of the universe who loves me and cares for me, and
Yes.
but to him, he thinks, this is okay. You're going to make it.
I've marveled for a long time at the line in the Bible where it talks about, where the Apostle Paul is writing about these light and momentary afflictions
Yeah,
are not
Yeah.
worth comparing with the eternal weight of glory.
sure.
And he had a vision of that eternal weight of glory that made the beatings, being lashed with whips that probably had glass and nails embedded in them, ultimately beheaded, being shipwrecked, being imprisoned.
Yeah.
And these weren't fancy prisons, right?
No.
As prisons go. And all the things he suffered and that he could say, these light and he suffered more, arguably, than most people ever do
Absolutely.
in their entire life. And how is he able to say these light and momentary afflictions
Yeah.
are not worthy to be compared with the eternal weight of glory is
Yeah.
something that I've marveled at for a
Yeah.
long time,
Yeah.
and still not sure I fully grasp.
Yeah, I agree. And I think for us, a big part of going through that is another place where Paul writes, and I think maybe it helps to inform why he could say that is, in Romans 8:28, he says, "For we know that all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose." It doesn't say all things are good. It just says all things work together for good. And I remember that was one of the things that I've alluded to earlier, but it's helped me through this. I think it's helped the kids in that same way. It is more of more of an eternal focus or a God-centered focus, where we look and we trust God that he's working these things together for good. And he's telling through history, all of history, this great and wonderful story. And it's a good story. It's a really good story. But like all good stories, it's got bad parts. It's got parts where it looks like the good guys are losing. And it's got stories where things look hopeless. And it's got parts where unexpectedly loved ones don't make it. And so all of the parts of the story aren't good, but it's working together for good. It is a good story. God's telling us this wonderful story that's for His glory. Now, Heather and I had hoped that the way that our story would glorify God was we would be, and I see this, I'm in town maybe, and I see an older married couple going in Walmart together, and they're walking, and their steps are slow, right? But you see that they love one another, and there's years of history there. That was what we had hoped our story would be, to glorify God, and instead, my story is not that I'm going to glorify God that way. It's going to be that we're going to glorify God with the 20 some odd years we had together. And then that's it. But there's the trust that despite the story having bad parts, having bad guys, having bad events, that it's a really good story that God's telling. And so what I want to do is play my part in that story as best I can. I want to do my duty and trust God for the results.
Yeah, that there's a profound faith and hope that you're expressing in what you're saying. And it's maybe interesting in that you hear of stories where people say, well, I used to believe in God, but then this hard thing happened, and then this loss happened, and these bad things happened. And if God is good, then maybe I don't like this God so much.
Yeah.
Or maybe I want to pretend that He doesn't exist. Or maybe I just want to rail against Him. Or maybe I want to forget about this whole faith thing or God thing or Christian thing or what have you. And you hear some people who kind of go the opposite direction.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing from you is, if anything, you're going deeper into your relationship with God in and through this loss, which was only several years ago.
Yeah. By the mercy and grace of God, that was not the response that I felt coming out of my heart on that. And I thank the Lord for that and praise Him for that. I understand how any of us, when we're hurt bad, we can want to lash out. And certainly, there's normal feelings with hurt where you're going to be angry, or you're going to, question things.
The stages of grief.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I've reminded. Sorry.
No problem.
I'm just.
I wish I had some water to offer you.
Well,
or
I've
something.
actually got it. Maybe
Do you?
It'd be good to take a drink.
Yeah, feel free.
Yeah, I've. It is by God's grace and mercy. One of the things I've tried to remind myself of in that, because there are questions, there's always going to be questions of why and that type of thing. But to try to remind myself that, for one, God's big enough for those questions. So God can handle me asking Him questions about that. And and He's okay with that. And then beyond that is, it's where else am I? Where else would I look? Where else would I turn? Where else would I want to go for comfort? Evil's a problem in the world. Bad things are a problem. When I was an atheist, that was a problem. That I thought, if God is good, if God's all loving, why does He let bad things happen? But I think it really does go back to that God is telling a good story. And good stories, the best stories, are the stories where bad things are happening. And there's challenges being faced, and there's evils to be overcome. And so if we want to be a part of that story that God's telling it, then we should cling to the author of that story. But there's no doubt that it's a challenge, and when we go through hard things, it's a challenge to look to God through that. And I don't want to minimize any challenge that anybody's going through. People have been hurt and things like that. But the only answer is Christ, and to cling to Christ.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It talks about how He's the God of all comfort.
Absolutely.
And how then, with the comfort that we receive from Him, we could then in turn comfort others. Is that something that you've experienced and you found in the midst of the grief, in the midst of the healing journey that you've been on?
Yeah. And I think when God gives us something, He always gives it to us, not just for us, but for other people. And I think I'd I always understood that a little easier with good things that happen to you. You know, if God's blessed you, you should want to bless other people. Um, but that was something that through losing Heather and the time that followed after that, I really came to realize that no, everything God gives you, He gives you not just for you, but He gives it to you for others, for you to be able to bless and minister to others. And so I came back that fall. So Heather passed away in the summer, and I came back that fall to teach. And I had a class, Basic Uniform Commercial Code, group of students.
God bless you for teaching that.
Right. So we're going to talk about secure transactions and payment systems, negotiable instruments, that type of thing.
Yes.
And so I've got this group of students, and they're third year students, so they're 3Ls. They're in their last year, and many of them I'd known well for years. You know, we've really come to know each other, and that's one of the things that I really appreciate about Liberty and Liberty Law School is we do get to know our students. And so this group of students, I came into class and I started going through the class, and I had not said anything really about. Of course, they all knew that Heather passed away, and I hadn't said anything about it. And in part, I had not wanted to because I don't like to cry in front of people. Where I grew up, men don't cry, period. You know, basically, and then, but you certainly don't cry in public. And it was really hard for me to talk about it without crying. And so I'd just not said anything about it. And I can't remember what class it was, but it wasn't too far into the semester where the Lord had really convicted me that was not the way to handle this.
Jesus wept publicly.
Yeah, exactly right. In fact, it's that verse. I just read that in my daily reading recently, and it's such a comfort to know that, you know, the Lord of the universe faced with death at a graveside, Jesus wept
For his friend Lazarus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jesus wept. Jesus saw the wrongness and the sorrow of sin and death there, and so I actually repented to that class. I told them at the beginning of a class, I said, I owe you all an apology, and I've not talked about this because I didn't, because it hurts and I didn't want to, but I'm convinced that I was wronging you and wronging the Lord by that, and so I'm going to try to talk about it. So there were some things then that I shared with that class that I know many of them have told me what an impact it had. Some of them just simple things that you wouldn't think that would come out of it, but I years ago, and it's a little hard for me to talk about some of it now, but I developed a habit of I would leave. I'd often get up and go to work before Heather and the kids were up, and so I would leave them a note. So I would just leave, and maybe sometimes it's a note, just here's what I'm doing during the day. Maybe it's a Bible verse. Maybe it's just something, you know, I love you. I'm going to miss you. Be glad to see you when I get home, you know, just something like that. And so I'd been in the habit of leaving those notes, and then Heather would leave notes for me. So I have some little notes in my desk right now that she had left, either put in maybe a lunch or that she had written when she'd be maybe waiting at my desk if she'd come to the office for some reason. And then I had notes that I'd left for her. And I just shared with that class how thankful I was for those notes. And I just encouraged them, you don't know when it's the last time you're going to see somebody you love. So maybe write them a little note and tell them you love them. You know, write them a little note and tell them you're thankful for them, that type of thing. And I had people specifically, and that one lady in particular who was a student who said she had shared that with her husband, and in all the years of their marriage, he had never written her a note or anything like that. And she told him that story, and he later wrote her a note, and she said, "I'm going to treasure it, you know, every day for the rest of my life, this note that I received." So you see, even in small ways, how God uses these things to help other people. And then I think by that comfort, we're comforted. You know, that I'm comforted to say, I don't understand all the reasons of God's plan that Heather and I wouldn't grow old together, that type of thing. But I can see little parts of how God's using it for good
Yes.
and uses it for good. Yeah.
I've heard little snippets here and there. I haven't been in this community a long time,
Sure.
but I heard that the community really rallied and came around you
Oh, yeah.
during that time in all sorts of ways. Colleagues being willing to teach for you. I think people bringing meals.
Yeah.
People like stepping up in all sorts of ways through that. I've only heard snippets, but you lived through that.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a bit about that. How did the community rally around you and for you during that time?
Yeah, we've really. I mean, I'll just admit, I'm a homer for Liberty. I love Liberty. I love the law school. But so that disclosure up front, but I've got good reasons to. I think, yeah. So I had colleagues of mine grade for me, and anybody who's ever done teaching, most people are going to tell you, the grading is not the part you love of your job, right? So I've said before, if somebody's willing to grade for you, man, they really love you. Yeah, that's for sure. But we had people bring us meals. That's students, faculty, staff. People just really rallied around us in that regard. We had people offer to come and do work on the farm that we live on and help with that. I don't know how many cards and gifts that people gave us. It was just one thing after another. I'll give you maybe just a couple of examples. One would be of the administration generally here at Liberty. There were some very high-ranking officials in Liberty University who came to the visitation and came through to tell me, whatever you need, Liberty is here to help you. I was actually given a reduced load that fall so I could have more time to be home with the kids and things like that, which is, that's no small thing. And then the students with, like I say, everything from bringing food to giving us gifts to just texting or emailing students that I'd had years ago when I first started teaching, reaching out to say, we heard, we love you, we're praying for you and the kids. It really does testify to the community that we've got here. And I might give you another example of that. It's not just for something that big. My oldest son, Elijah, so I've got 3 girls, 3 boys, and 3 more girls. So it's 3 sets of 3. And Elijah's my oldest son. And it's been a while ago now, but more recent, since his mother passed away, he had to have surgery on his feet. So we had a couple of surgeries. And I was teaching income tax. And so the income tax class knew that I was going to miss class because obviously now, I'm the parent who has to do, there's not another parent to take him to the surgery. So it's, these are, I'm going to do these things alone. It's my privilege, but that's something that you expect to do with a spouse. And then you don't. Then you do it alone. So, but it's obviously a great privilege to be the father to these children. Such a blessing. And so I took Eli to that. They knew that I was going to be missing class to take him to that. And when I came into class, I think it was the Monday before we were going to go on a Wednesday, there were 2 big care packages on the podium. One for me and one for Elijah for us to take on the trip up there. And it had Sudoku books and, coloring pencils and snacks and, just things that you would look through that would occupy your time and that, you would enjoy and would maybe make a weight like that better. And it's just things like that. I could go on and on. My colleagues took up. They know that we, as a family, would often go to a particular restaurant and an orchard in the area in the fall, and that was something Heather and the kids and I had done for years. And one day, I had a card in my box signed by my fellow faculty members with some money in there to pay for that trip. So it's just that people know you and they love you, and there really is that community there that is pretty special.